On a bright day, in a park full of flowers, there was a pair of siblings walking together. The younger sister, who had long blonde hair with a red outfit that suited her small stature. Her name was Carol, with her round red eyes. Carol looked very happy when she saw the white flower and told her brother that the flower was very beautiful. The brother, who had white hair with a faded purple color, smiled happily seeing his sister happy and nodded in agreement with her. His name was Zex. Zex then had an idea and picked one of the flowers and attached it to his sister's hair near her ear. Zex commented that the flower looked very suitable for his sister. Carol smiled happily and thanked him. However, her smile didn't last long and faded when she realized something. Zex, who saw it, was confused and asked what was wrong. With a slightly sad tone, Carol told him that she was curious if they picked the flower, whether the flower felt pain, a gentle feeling from Carol that even adults never thought of. Zex just realized it and never expected that. He smiled and said that it seemed he failed to understand that until it made his sister feel sad. The sister immediately dismissed her brother's words by saying that it wasn't his fault. Because she didn't want to see her brother feel guilty, Carol hugged him and made Zex smile again. According to Zex, at least now his sister was on the right path to grow into a good and friendly person, and he still promised to change his sister's future. Back to the past, in a park, a man was suddenly slapped by a woman. This is a flashback from Zex in his previous life. The woman who slapped Zex angrily questioned who was more important between her or Zex's sister. Zex knew that he was at fault in this matter and explained that he received a request from his own parents to take care of his sister. He also apologized and promised to prioritize the woman in the next meeting. Even though Zex had apologized and would fix it, the woman was fed up and asked to end their relationship and just left. Zex was silent there, feeling the stinging pain from his cheek that had just been slapped by his girlfriend. He knew that his parents loved their family very much, but it was not uncommon for his parents to always go to work and rarely be at home. Even when Zex and his sister were still small, the two of them often had to stay alone without their parents. Even though their parents didn't come home, they always went to work in the morning and only left food for the two of them in the refrigerator. In addition, his parents also asked Zex at his young age to take care of his sister, who had a weak body and was always sick, and taking care of his sister had become his routine until adulthood. Returning from the park, Zex came home carrying some cooking ingredients and told his sister that he would soon make dinner. The sister, who had now grown up, was seen sitting on the sofa with a blanket hugging her body. She was the sister named Nanami. While holding the game console in her hand and occasionally coughing, with a weak tone, Nanami asked her brother to just relax in making dinner, and she also asked for the special mixed tea made by her brother. Zex nodded, accepting his sister's request. After a while, Zex returned to the sofa with his warm tea and gave it to Nanami. Zex then commented on the game that his sister was playing, because he had often seen her play the same one, making Zex ask if she was playing that game again. Nanami nodded and explained that this time she was playing the route of the character named Orica. Not long after, Nanami looked uncomfortable and gave her game console to her brother, while saying with an uncomfortable tone that this was the battle part in her game. Hearing his sister's request made Zex a bit annoyed and scolded her for not always giving him the hardest part. Nanami kept pleading with her brother to play the battle part. When he was about to accept it, Zex realized that his sister's face was sweating and red. Of course, Zex became worried and immediately checked her body temperature, which turned out to be true, that his sister was having a fever. Zex scolded her for Nanami's negligence, who got a fever because she had difficulty eating. Even though she was being scolded by her brother, Nanami just laughed weakly when she was caught. Because of his sister, who was always negligent, Zex decided to take her game console and firmly ordered her to stop playing games and go to sleep immediately. But Nanami refused and gave the reason that she had decided to see the end of Orica's character story today. With her brilliant idea, Nanami decided to sleep on the sofa while watching her brother play the game for her. Seeing his sister's too smart idea made Zex finally give in and let her lie on the sofa. For the first time, Zex played the game that his sister always played and commented that the game had a hero character named Zeon and also a saintess, or holy woman, named Kizara, which the game was a typical standard fantasy story. Nanami nodded in agreement and also commented that according to her, the character with blonde and curly hair was amazing. Hearing the description of the character, Zex tried to guess if the character Nanami meant was the evil character named Caroline. Nanami nodded, confirming it. After a while of playing, Nanami asked again if her brother preferred a character like Caroline. Zex shook his head and explained that he only saw Caroline as a pitiful character who didn't have someone who loved her. Even the character ended tragically. Because they were discussing Caroline, Nanami, with a weak tone and a thin smile on her face, said to her brother that she might leave in the middle of the game in her brother's life, just like Caroline. Understanding what his sister meant immediately made Zex shocked and immediately scolded her not to say something like that. Zex tried to emphasize and give support to his sister by saying that in the future, when Nanami brought her boyfriend home to discuss before marriage, he already had a plan where he would say his signature line that if her boyfriend wanted to have Nanami, then pass him first. Hearing that, Nanami laughed weakly and replied that the sentence should be said by their father, not by her brother. According to Zex, because the two of them are full siblings, they look like they love each other. However, that didn't last forever, as if fate forced them to experience the opposite. One day, Nanami's condition worsened, which forced her to be treated in the hospital, the treatment room. The sound of heart monitoring decorated the silent atmosphere. Zex continued to accompany his sister, who was lying weakly on the bed with various tubes connected to her body. Calling her brother's name, Nanami with a weak tone apologized to him because during her life she only caused problems and became a burden to her brother. She also thanked her brother very much for always being with her all this time. Zex immediately held her hand, which felt thinner. Zex, with a tone holding back tears, answered firmly that he never considered her a burden at all. Nanami's words became the last farewell to her beloved brother. Her departure became a hard blow for Zex. But his misfortune didn't stop there, as if fate was not satisfied with his misfortune. When Zex was mourning in the treatment room where Nanami slept forever, a nurse came and informed Zex that his parents were involved in a car accident and now had been taken to the ER. Zex's heart, which was already cracked by his sister's departure, now shattered hearing his parents had an accident. Unfortunately, as a result of the accident, his parents also had to leave life forever, leaving Zex alone. According to the police report, the plausible theory for the accident experienced by his parents was that Zex's parents were in a hurry to be able to accompany their daughter's last moments, but tragically, because of the rush, it took their lives. As a result of the two incidents, Zex began to feel trauma about losing someone again. Even since their death, Zex began to stop making relationships with people around him. Time passed, and Zex was already an adult and started working, even though his physique was already adult, but the trauma was still in him, as if rooted in him. When night came, Zex continued to work at his office desk. Even one of his co-workers reminded him again that the workers' drinking session was about to start. He was Anzu, a man with blonde hair. Zex, who still had the trauma, often refused it, and so did today. He gave the reason that he would work overtime until he felt enough were finished. But this time Anzu didn't let him, and forced Zex to join the drinking event, which made him forced to follow it. In the restaurant, the workers in his office started their drinking event. They chatted about various things, including Zex, who talked about Anzu, who already had a child. In the middle of the conversation, suddenly his female co-worker questioned Zex's status, who at that time was still unmarried. Zex nodded, confirming his status. Then his female co-worker introduced her junior to Zex, explaining that her junior had an interest in Zex and suggested trying their relationship by doing a light date. Zex, who still had trauma from his past, refused the offer and apologized to her while explaining that lately he was not looking for a romantic relationship. Zex knew that his answer would make his female co-worker's junior sad, and his reason also realized that there were many people better for her junior compared to him. Zex felt that he was better off alone than having to repeat the feeling when left by a loved one for the second time. Returning from the drinking event, Zex walked home. Because he drank too much, Zex felt a bit wobbly and planned to go to the convenience store to buy something there before going home. But because of his condition, Zex didn't notice the traffic sign where the pedestrian light was already red, which made him cross right when a truck was speeding towards him. For a split second before being hit, Zex knew that this might be the end for him and felt grateful for rejecting the junior earlier. After being hit by the truck, when he opened his eyes again, Zex now woke up as a baby who thought that he was punished to become a baby because he made his junior cry. Looking around, Zex realized that the decoration and size of this room was quite foreign and magnificent. Not long after, from outside near the entrance door, a woman's voice was heard telling the guard that now it was time for Master Zex to drink milk. The guard then let the woman in, who turned out to be a maid. For a moment Zex saw the maid's appearance, which made him a bit surprised because the maid's uniform style had a Western style. Suddenly, the maid offered the milk bottle to Zex's mouth without any gentleness. The female maid grumbled to herself while giving milk to Zex. Ignoring her unfriendly attitude, Zex instead focused on the language used by the maid, where what he heard the maid using was Japanese. So that made Zex think that the place or region he lived in now was Japan. After a few hours there, Zex realized that there were 2 caretakers or nannies, but none of them was his mother, and they were always cold and indifferent. There was even one time when the maid was changing Zex's diaper. She grumbled where, according to her, Zex was a baby that made her uncomfortable. Besides not crying or laughing, Zex had white hair, which most likely meant that Zex was colorless or without color. Hearing that made Zex curious about the nickname, and even Zex with his small hand tried to see his still short hair. Leaving the room, the maid said that Zex was an unfortunate baby. After a few days there, Zex began to know some things where the treatment of the caretakers or nannies really neglected him and only did breastfeeding, changing diapers, and also bathing him. In addition, Zex also realized from the room style and the maid's appearance that this year was in the Middle Ages, where he also remembered that in that era there was an experiment where many babies died even before reaching the age of 1 year. Now his body was a baby, but his soul was 27 years old. Even though he already knew about the experiment, Zex felt that it was better since he didn't want to have a deep relationship with others, and he also didn't want to experience losing someone again for the second time. And because of that, he chose not to make relationships with others from the beginning. That's what he hoped for. But fate said otherwise. A few years later, a baby girl was born, and the maid told Zex, who could already walk, that the baby girl was Zex's sister. Instantly, Zex's face paled. The trauma from his old life resurfaced. He was so shocked and scared that Zex staggered backwards away from his sister's baby basket. Not long after, the door opened and a woman's voice was heard happily talking about Zex, who had grown up. Yes, she was Zex's mother in this life. His mother then commented that Zex was cute. She then raised her hand to shoulder level and called the maid in the room, which made her bow obediently. After a while, the maid finished doing what his mother ordered, which was putting a big ribbon on Zex's hair. Zex just stayed silent with an uncomfortable and confused face with his parents' behavior, and it looked like his parents were so harmonious. Not long after, Zex's sister named Caroline started crying hard until it made Zex shocked. But something unexpected happened where his father suddenly commented that his daughter was crying again, and according to him, his daughter was noisy. His mother also agreed and invited her husband to go and enjoy their tea time. And they just left. That made Zex silent in 1,000 languages, confused and shocked hearing and seeing his parents' reaction. He was so disbelief that Zex walked and started banging on his room door, trying to call them or anyone when his sister was crying. Zex knew that this was not the right time for them to leave his sister in this crying situation. Behind the door, Zex could hear the conversation of the maid and his guard talking about Zex's behavior, who was playing with the door again. They thought Zex did it because he was hungry because the maids had breastfed Zex and Caroline, but now it was not time to change their diapers. Worse, the guard agreed and suggested to just leave it. Of course, that made Zex shocked because they didn't do their job properly. Zex, who was reluctant to have or make relationships with someone, started to be confused and restless. In the end, Zex tried to ignore Caroline and convinced himself that it was not his problem. Zex then walked to the pillow that he often used to spend his time. Took the book there. Zex felt amused, because the book there was only a book about learning to read letters, and reading the book at his age of 28 years was very strange according to him. Taking another item to spend his time, Zex took a triangular block toy. Zex felt amused again because playing with such a toy at the age of 28 years. Even when trying to find another toy, Zex instead found a baby toy that could make sounds. There was nothing Zex could do to spend his time, and Caroline's crying sound became clearer in his ears. Taking a deep breath, Zex took the baby toy and walked towards his sister's baby basket and gave the toy to her. Seeing Zex there, instantly her cry stopped and stared at Zex for a while and took the toy. Seeing his sister's reaction made Zex feel happy. But suddenly Caroline threw the toy and hit Zex's forehead right on. Zex, who was annoyed, decided to ignore her again. Time kept passing, and Zex really ignored Caroline, who was crying. Even so, Zex tried hard to convince himself that this was not his business. But still it bothered him. Turning to the clock, Zex realized that the time now had exceeded the time to breastfeed Caroline, and the maids hadn't come since earlier. Because of that, Zex walked towards the door and knocked on it, not banging. But the reaction Zex heard from behind the door made Zex annoyed. The maid talked to the guard with an uncomfortable tone that Zex was playing with the door again, and questioned why Zex didn't play with the toys they had provided. Caroline's cry got louder, and Zex tried to open the door. Reaching the door handle with his small body, Zex failed several times, until finally Zex stepped back to take distance before running and jumping to the door handle, which ended up opening the door inward. That made Zex fall immediately, and the maid and the guard there were shocked. With an angry and firm tone, Zex told them with a few words, namely Caroline and also milk. As a result, the maid immediately brought a bottle of milk and gave it to Caroline, who immediately stopped her cry. Zex stood behind her with his angry gaze and crossed his arms on his chest. After breastfeeding Caroline until full, the maid said goodbye to Zex. But Zex again with an angry and firm tone said one word, diaper, which immediately made the maid's body jolt and immediately changed Caroline's diaper. After all that, Caroline started to laugh and calm down, unlike before, who cried hard. Seeing it also made Zex happy and laugh. But when he realized, Zex panicked because he reflexively helped solve his sister's problem and convinced himself again that he helped her only this time. But the next day the maid or nanny didn't come at diaper changing time. Again, Zex helped his sister to change her diaper. Every time Zex took care of his sister, Zex emphasized to himself that he helped his sister only this time, and so on until Caroline could sit on the floor. Seeing his sister could sit made Zex happy too, forgetting his desire to ignore his sister. Caroline took the block toy and gave it to Zex. Zex accepted it and thanked with a smile. Seeing his sister's cute smile made Zex's heart melt. That also made Zex just remember again his desire and started to panic himself. Seeing Zex behaving strangely, Caroline immediately made a sound while directing her hand towards Zex. Realizing that Zex apologized and gave the block toy back to Caroline, Caroline became happy and accepted it before giving it back to Zex. Zex was silent and accepted it. Caroline made the same sound and hand gesture to Zex, which made Zex frown before giving it again. The same situation repeated until it made Zex wonder when his sister would stop repeating this action. Time passed, and now Zex's relationship with his sister became closer. But one night, Zex woke up and realized that he had a fever. He thought that the cause might be the flu or other contagious diseases. Because of that, Zex felt he had to be careful not to transmit his illness to his sister. With his fever condition, Zex walked towards the door and knocked on the door. Unlike before, the guard and the maid immediately opened it and asked what he needed. Zex with a nasal voice. Zex explained that he had a fever which most likely could be transmitted to his sister and asked them to move his sister to another room. The maid refused, saying that she couldn't move Caroline to another room without permission from the master, aka Zex's parents. Instead, she would send a request to the head maid to call a doctor. Because of his fever condition, made Zex already tired and lazy to pretend anymore, even cursing softly in front of the maid and his guard. Zex then with a firm and high tone ordered them to immediately move Caroline's bed to the other side in his room if they couldn't move her to another room. That made the maid and the guard jolt and immediately entered the room to fulfill his order. In the middle of working on it, the maid started talking about Zex's recent action, where according to her, Zex just behaved like an adult even though he was only 1 year old. The guard nodded in agreement and commented that maybe Zex was possessed. The maid commented again that she was sure that Zex was cursed or something. Not long after, with his nasal voice, Zex ordered them again to get out when finished because he would sleep. Lying on the bed, Zex knew that he had messed up and could make the situation worse because he stopped behaving like a child, but he didn't regret it. His breath started to be heavy. His face reddened as his body temperature continued to rise. Everything felt painful. Zex started to question himself when was the last time he felt a fever like this. He guessed that maybe it happened when he was still small, where when he had a fever, Nanami, aka his sister in his old life, was always by his side. Slowly Zex's eyes closed as he fell asleep. In his dream, Zex saw a figure of a little girl crying in front of him. Her crying voice was so clear which made Zex wonder who the little girl was. The voice felt familiar until it made Zex think that the figure was little Nanami. His brother instinct immediately activated, and Zex immediately reached out his hand and tried to calm the little girl figure. Zex immediately woke up from his dream and realized that his hand was raised as if reaching for something. Caroline's crying voice was also heard, which turned out her crying voice entered his dream. Turning towards the baby bed where Caroline was seen standing there and making a sound like wanting to call Zex. Zex, who was still lying, told her that he had a fever that could be contagious. But Caroline, who didn't understand, kept making the same sound until finally making a worried sound and saying one word, brother, with a face that almost cried and a hand gesture that wanted to hug him. Hearing that, Zex was quite shocked and couldn't believe that Caroline considered him as her brother, even though Zex himself took care of her only because he had nothing else he could do. But as a result of Caroline's movement, who insisted on hugging Zex regardless of the distance of their beds, which was far, made her lose her balance and fall over her bed barrier. Zex panicked and reflexively jumped from the bed and ran towards her. Luckily, thanks to his quick reflex, Zex managed to catch her before hitting the floor. Zex immediately saw his sister. Luckily, Caroline was not hurt and instead looked smiling happily in her brother's arms. Zex sighed in relief, grateful that his sister was not hurt, and started to feel weak again because his body was still feverish. That also, Zex started to lose balance after moving due to the momentary adrenaline and staggered fainted. Caroline, who didn't understand her brother's situation, just kept calling him and patting, trying to wake him up. But because he didn't wake up, plus now it was still midnight, Caroline started to yawn and sleep next to Zex on the floor. Without them realizing, a soft light came out from Caroline's body when they were sleeping there. In the morning, Zex woke up and was shocked to find himself sleeping on the floor. Besides that, Zex's fever was gone and healthy again. Turning to the side, Zex found his sister sleeping soundly beside him while holding Zex's clothes. Zex wondered to himself if his sister slept beside him because she was worried. But the question was refuted when he realized the fact that Caroline was only 8 months old, so the thought felt impossible. Not long after, Caroline opened her eyes and Zex greeted her. Somehow, when seeing Zex healthy again, made Caroline immediately get up and reach out her hand with a wide smile on her face, as if Caroline was also happy with her brother's healthy condition again. Her smile lifted Zex's trauma again, but this time not feeling scared. But the trauma felt like it was being treated by Caroline. Zex knew that this might just be his imagination, he who had decided not to have a relationship with anyone, but he couldn't avoid feelings and situations like this. Zex started to accept the fact that he now had a sister. Reaching out his hand, Zex hugged his sister tightly and emphasized to himself again that he was Caroline's brother and Caroline was his beloved sister. Since that day, their relationship became close. Time flowed and several years passed. Zex and Caroline grew up. Now Caroline could stand upright and started to understand what Zex said. Even though she still couldn't speak clearly, Caroline was very enthusiastic and excited when with her brother. Standing in front of the bookshelf, Zex asked his sister what book they would read today. Caroline enthusiastically chose a book, even though she couldn't read the book title. After choosing what she thought was interesting, Caroline took it and hugged the book, whose size was half of her body. Taking the book, Zex read the book title, where the book was about the history of their current country, named the Holy Kingdom. Zex accepted her choice and asked Caroline to sit while he would read it. The two of them went to a pillow available on the floor and sat comfortably there. Zex started reading the book. The history book told a story about the Demon King who came to the last defense line of this kingdom. Many people had given up thinking that everything would end, but in the middle of the despair a foreign voice was heard saying that they would not lose. The voice became the center of attention, and when turning, the voice came from a young man and a girl. The young man was the hero named Zeon, and the girl was the saintess, or holy girl, named Kazara. For a while Zex was silent and commented briefly while frowning that this story was a standard story for picture stories. But after thinking again, Zex realized something big that he just realized. His same reaction and the characters he had heard made Zex very shocked. Zex just realized that this world was the same world as the game world he had played in his old life. Turning to his sister, Zex knew that his sister had the nickname Karen and had the full name Caroline Flamerl Ui Seri Forenata. Her characteristic appearance made Zex remember that Caroline was an important character in the game's storyline. Back to the past, where Zex was playing the game that his sister asked for, Zex looked so serious and kept muttering to himself while completing the game. Not to complete it to the end, but to find a way to enter another story route in the game. In the dark room, suddenly the light was turned on and Nanami's voice was heard calling him. Turning, Zex asked if Nanami hadn't slept yet. Nanami walked to the kitchen and said that she had slept but woke up because she was thirsty. Seeing her brother staying up late to play the game made Nanami ask back if Zex liked the game so much. Zex hesitated to answer before diverting the topic by asking Nanami to go back to sleep immediately, and Nanami obeyed. The real reason Zex played the game seriously was because of what Nanami said before, where Nanami had hoped to find a story route where Caroline could survive and avoid her death. Besides that, Zex also had another reason, namely, by playing the game Zex had a lot of time he could spend with Nanami by his side, a selfish hope from him that made him play the game. But no matter how long Zex spent his time, Zex never found the route until death picked up Nanami. Realizing all that, Zex became more convinced. His current sister was Caroline, the important character who would become a villain and destined to die. Zex's heart beat very fast when he felt shocked by the fact until it made it difficult for him to breathe. In the middle of Zex, who was shocked, suddenly a pair of Caroline's small hands held Zex's cheeks and kissed him gently, which immediately made Zex a bit calm. Caroline's warmth was able to make Zex calm again. Even Caroline didn't stop there. She stroked Zex's head and sang a children's mantra to eliminate the pain. Zex was touched seeing his sister's gentle and innocent figure getting such a cruel fate in the future. But because of that, Zex convinced himself not to make such a decision, and he knew that now had a time background far before the main story in the game started, so he had many choices available to explore. Zex wiped his tears and held his sister's hand, while saying with a smile that Caroline didn't need to worry because he would do something about her fate. But Caroline, who didn't understand her brother's meaning, innocently asked if brother was happy again. Zex smiled and hugged her while saying that he was fine. As long as his sister was by his side, he would always be fine. Since then, Zex promised himself to protect, and also change the fate that his sister had. Time passed in the afternoon, when the two of them were playing with colored pencils and paper in the room. Zex began to gather the information he had obtained so far. The first thing was that Zex knew that he had reincarnated into the dating game world with action and RPG genres that he had played in his previous life, named The Tale of the Brave Saint. And he had a background in the game as Caroline's brother named Zex. This game also had a different story depending on the gender of the character played by the players. At the academy, if the male character would become the hero, while the female would become the saintess. And during the academy, the players would experience romantic moments with the characters and become close to them. The main story in the game was divided into 3 parts. The first part was at the academy. The second part was outside the academy, namely adventuring to reseal the freed Demon King. And the third part had individual routes for each character who had a romantic relationship with the player. Even though it was divided into 3 story parts, the story was dominated in the first part. The character Caroline herself only appeared in the game when the player chose her character as female. Since her first appearance, it could be said that Caroline was the worst. She was arrogant, selfish, and also extremely jealous. The opposite of the character chosen by the player, who had an honest, innocent, and pure nature that truly reflected a saintess. As time went by, Caroline's jealousy burned when people started approaching the player's character, and Caroline started bullying the player's character. But during the love bar that had been made by the player's character with those characters, made the player's character's reputation increase due to the bullying. Because she didn't accept that, Caroline ended up joining the Demon King's side to end the player's character, and Caroline died because of her choice. In the middle of concluding that information, Caroline suddenly gently pulled Zex's clothes. Turning, Zex asked with a smile on his face what was wrong. Caroline smiled and proudly showed her scribbled drawing. Zex also smiled and praised her, then stroked her head. Because of the praise, Caroline became excited and said that she would draw more. Seeing that, Zex became more convinced to do something for his sister so that she could avoid her death. Walking in the hallway, Zex thought of a way to save his sister. Zex thought to avoid the main path of the game so that he could avoid her death. Besides that, there was another plan where Zex raised his sister to be good so that she didn't have her arrogant nature, and that way his sister wouldn't become the enemy of the saintess and wouldn't fall into the Demon King's temptation. Passing several hallways, Zex found the maids who were talking about him with an unpleasant tone. Zex knew that one of the reasons Caroline became an evil character was because she didn't get love from her parents, and the maids also treated her coldly. At least that's what he could conclude from all the things that happened now. Going down the stairs, Zex understood that even he only saw his parents once when his sister was still young, and he also doubted whether Caroline remembered her parents' faces. Realizing that, Zex also thought to take on his parents' task as a substitute to give their love to Caroline, which made him refuse firmly because it was impossible. He was sure that nothing would change if he didn't make contact with his parents directly. Because of that, Zex walked to the room where his parents were last seen. But when entering it, Zex only found the head maid there. Zex asked her about his parents, and the head maid answered that he would inform his master when they came next to this place. Hearing that, Zex couldn't believe that his parents didn't even live in this mansion, which made him have no chance to meet them. Time passed quickly. In the usual room where Zex and Caroline spent their time, Zex, who couldn't stand it anymore, started to get emotional, yelling at his parents not to leave their children in a separate mansion like this. Besides that, what made him emotional was that 3 months had passed since he left a message for his parents, and they never came here. In the middle of his overflowing emotions, Caroline suddenly told Zex with her innocent and panicked tone that she really needed to pee. Hearing that, Zex panicked and quickly carried her body to the bathroom. After a while, they came out with their relieved faces because they arrived at the bathroom on time. Not long after, the head maid's voice was heard welcoming their master, aka Zex and Caroline's parents. Hearing that, Zex, who was on the second floor, immediately climbed the wall barrier and called them. The head maid looked panicked and asked him to come down immediately because it was dangerous, but his parents' reaction was not like the head maid. They instead left and asked the head maid to prepare tea for them. Hearing that, Zex couldn't believe that his parents really ignored him. Seeing her brother's action made Caroline confused. Zex came down and thought his sister also felt the same. Zex immediately assured her that their parents might not realize their presence. But hearing that, innocently Caroline asked what father and mother were, Zex felt both reasonable and shocked because his sister didn't understand the words. Back to his room, Zex explained the meaning of those words. Using rabbit dolls, started to explain where the father rabbit and mother rabbit hugged their child with full love, and those two people were people who loved their child, people who always hugged their child and always by their child's side to protect them. After explaining all that, Zex asked his sister if Caroline understood. Caroline nodded innocently and pointed at Zex while smiling and said that Zex was her mother and father. Zex was stunned there, shocked by the conclusion Caroline got. Zex left and gave Caroline the reason that he wanted to go to the bathroom first. When leaving the room, Zex didn't go to the bathroom, but went to the room where his parents were. He thought that he had to meet them. When he arrived, Zex was about to open the door and enter. But when hearing there was a conversation there, Zex stopped his intention and chose to eavesdrop on them. The father's voice was heard talking about his task to take care of a region, which of course according to him felt troublesome, and instead delegated the task to the head maid to take care of it. Then the mother asked the head maid why their 2 children were outside the room. Even the mother openly said that she didn't want her clothes to get dirty because of their saliva, and for her children were very noisy where they always screamed all the time. The head maid interrupted a bit and told them that Zex asked him to meet them, but the mother ordered him to just ignore it and only need to take care of it by the head maid. After hearing that, Zex closed the door and was silent for a while there before returning to his room. Zex met his sister again and accompanied her as usual, reading books, feeding her, changing clothes, until accompanying her when sleeping. Zex knew that becoming a parent substitute was difficult, but he would do his best to give parental love to his sister. Time passed, the 2 of them then grew up and were allowed to leave the room. The 2 of them went to the garden. There cheerfully Caroline pointed at a butterfly flying gracefully and asked what it was. Zex happily explained that it was a magical creature named Light Butterfly. The animal came to this garden because the garden caretaker took care of the plants and flowers in the garden very well. Zex then told Caroline that there was the garden caretaker not far from there. Approaching him, the garden caretaker was a bit surprised and only realized that there was Zex alone. And when wanting to greet Zex alone, his words stopped when seeing Caroline with him. Caroline looked very excited, full of curiosity and admiration for the garden caretaker. Caroline bowed her body and thanked him with an innocent smile on her face, seeing that the garden caretaker looked awkward and confused how to react. On the other hand, Zex also smiled seeing his sister's behavior, which looked quite far from the character he knew, and was sure that at least Caroline was far from her tragic fate. Even so, he also knew that he shouldn't lower his guard because Caroline was still 2 years old, so there was a possibility that her personality could disappear drastically in the future. Besides that, this world was the same world in the game, and there was a possibility that Caroline would be forced to follow her tragic fate. Seeing his cute and innocent sister's figure, Zex convinced himself again to protect his beloved sister and to achieve his goal. Zex knew that he had to become strong to face all the possibilities that came. The next morning, the sun hadn't fully shown its light. Zex was already awake and warming up in the garden. While stretching, Zex thought that he had heard that training muscles in children was not good, so he decided to train his body lightly until his body got used to being ready to fight anytime. After doing a small run for a few minutes, Zex stopped at a building where the mansion kitchen was. Zex entered it, and the maids on duty there were seen busy doing their work. An old man said fireball, which immediately a fireball appeared in his hand and put it into the furnace. Seeing that, Zex increasingly knew that in this world there was also magic like in the game, and he decided to practice magic too. Magic in this world also had their respective attributes, and everyone had compatibility with each attribute. Like the example of the old man who used fire attribute magic because he had characteristics like red hair and eyes. The characteristics appeared right when they were born into this world, which showed what magic attribute they could use. Seeing Zex there, the old man asked what he needed to come to the kitchen. Zex asked him for a drink. The old man told the other maid, and the female maid accepted it. She immediately took a glass and used her water attribute magic to create water ball and poured the water into the glass. The woman also had blue hair and eyes, which showed the magic attribute she could use was water magic attribute. The female maid gave the glass to Zex. Seeing that, the old man commented that seeing Zex, who was amazed just because seeing simple magic made him very pitiful, especially Zex was born as a noble but became a colorless or without color. That was Zex's current condition. Having white hair and gray eyes made him a person who didn't have a magic attribute. Everyone in this world was born with mana and had a magic attribute. But he was the opposite, who couldn't materialize or manifest his mana. So the only people who couldn't use magic were those without color. The maids started discussing their master's situation, which had a quite dangerous situation because they had offspring with colorless condition, while their second offspring, namely Caroline, had blonde hair, and they were sure that Caroline had light magic attribute. According to them, if Caroline succeeded in using light magic like a saint, then their master would be very happy. Hearing that, Zex also agreed with them. If Caroline had a very valuable value, why did his parents treat her very coldly, same to him, and that according to him was very unreasonable. The maids also talked about other possibilities, where when Caroline succeeded in becoming someone who could use light magic like a saint, then the maids could boast themselves because they had served her. They also didn't need to worry about Zex, who was the colorless. Zex also knew that lately the maids started treating Caroline better, but that didn't apply to him. Labeled as a failure since birth, that's how people saw the colorless. But according to him, not having any attribute didn't mean useless. Time passed, and Zex, who was in the room with his sister, found his sister, who fell asleep on the pillow on the floor. Seeing that, Zex woke her up and invited her to sleep on the bed. Zex accompanied her until she really fell asleep. After Caroline fell asleep, Zex went out again to train his body again. But this time not just training his body as usual, but trying a technique, namely physical boost, where the technique was able to strengthen the body by flowing the mana in their body. The technique was something that everyone could do, even the colorless like him, and that was explained in his game. Besides that, in this world there was no research on magic that could be used by people without attributes, so he couldn't use magic yet. That's why he focused on mastering the technique now and training himself to control the mana in his body. But when Zex tried to control his mana, suddenly every joint in his finger tore and blood dripped. That made Zex make a theory where everyone could use the technique, but if they made their own mistake in regulating the output power, then it would end up hurting themselves. Then another question crossed his mind. What would happen if he made a mistake when training it in his head? And yes, a horrible image appeared in his head and made him not want to do it. Even though it felt painful, Zex had decided to do it to achieve his goal to protect his sister. Time passed in the room. Caroline just woke up from her nap. Opening her eyes, Caroline looked around and didn't find her brother anywhere, which made her call him. When Zex just returned and opened the door, Caroline immediately ran towards him and hugged him. That made Zex quite surprised and apologized for not being there when she woke up. Caroline loosened her hug and found her brother's hand full of wounds. That made her ask and reflexively hold it with a shocked and worried face. Zex, with his awkward smile, explained that this was due to his magic training. Suddenly, Caroline cried while looking at her brother with her shocked and worried face. That, of course, made Zex also surprised and immediately covered the wound on his hand while apologizing for making Caroline see something that scared her. Zex tried to divert her fear by inviting her to read a book together. But even though she was being read a book by him, Caroline's gaze remained fixed on her brother's wounded hand with her worried face. Zex read a story about a traveler who met the forest guardian, where the forest guardian asked for 3 things if the traveler's wish wanted to come true. Hearing the word wish, Zex immediately stopped and fell into his thoughts, where he instead started thinking about theory about magic. On the other hand, Caroline, who saw her brother's unusual behavior, made her worried and kept calling him. Because there was no response, Caroline even raised her tone and shook her brother's body, which immediately made him aware again and apologized. The next day, the same thing happened. Caroline woke up alone in the room. Zex practiced magic in the garden. When reading a book, Zex again sank into his thoughts. When playing dolls, Zex preferred to make notes on his theory. That made Caroline feel ignored by her brother. Until in the early morning, Zex was about to get down from the bed and go to train his body as usual. But this time Caroline, who was still asleep, held Zex's clothes tightly, showing how much Caroline wanted to be with her brother. But when waking up, Caroline found her brother was gone with his sleepwear on the bed. That made Caroline pout and upset. With her annoyance, Caroline dared to leave her room and go to the garden alone. She kept calling her brother until she met the garden caretaker. The garden caretaker told Caroline not to be in the garden alone. Caroline asked him where her brother was. The garden caretaker told her that he hadn't seen him today and invited her to go back to wait for Zex's return in the mansion. Caroline held her clothes tightly, feeling upset because she couldn't find her brother and ended up waiting alone in her room. On the other hand, Zex, who was training his body strengthening technique, now was doing a test. He took a wooden stick and tried to throw it up, which felt very light. Then he tried to crush the wooden stick using one empty hand and succeeded. Seeing the success in using the technique, Zex planned to increase his training, namely training the advanced technique, which he was sure with the technique he could crush stones easily. But when about to start, a bush sound was heard behind him, and when turning there was Caroline there with her gloomy face. Zex approached and asked since when Caroline arrived here, but the first thing Caroline said was the word hate. Hearing the word made Zex jolt. Caroline added again with a sad tone that she hated magic, hearing that Zex just realized one crucial thing. That was strengthened by Zex, who realized that Caroline's eyes looked almost losing their light. Caroline cried and said that she wanted her brother to stay. Hearing that Zex started blaming himself, he instead was too focused on becoming strong to protect his sister. But the result was the opposite and instead made her cry and hurt her heart. He should know what his sister needed most from anyone. Zex approached her and hugged her gently. He immediately apologized and explained that this reason might sound like just an excuse, but he loved her more than anything, and that wouldn't change forever. Hearing it made Caroline's cry stop and asked the seriousness of what he said. Zex nodded and said that he promised about it. Caroline's cry disappeared and was replaced with a smile on her face. The two of them then held hands and walked home together to their mansion. The next day, Zex did his training as usual. But this time he was not alone. Caroline joined him. Zex asked again his sister's conviction to join him in practicing magic. But Caroline looked very sure that she was really sure because she wanted to be with her brother. Zex asked again, isn't magic could hurt, and that was scary for Caroline. Caroline pouted a bit, and with a firm tone that she was not afraid, but she hated it more if her brother got hurt. Hearing that, Zex realized that yesterday his sister cried because she was worried about him. Then Zex asked again, then what about magic? Caroline answered with the same tone that she liked it if her brother stayed. Hearing that, Zex smiled and said that he would teach some magic to his sister, and Caroline looked excited. Caroline had blonde hair and red eyes. The characteristics indicated that Caroline had magic compatibility with fire and light attributes. Because of that, Zex taught her to use fire attribute magic. But Zex remembered clearly that in his game, Caroline couldn't use light magic at all, even though she had compatibility with light magic attribute. Besides, the owner of light magic attribute was rare, and there were only a few people in the world. There was also a theory where having compatibility with magic attribute didn't always mean being able to use the attribute magic. Even in his game, there was a rumor circulating to use light attribute magic related to thoughts like thinking about the most loved person in his heart. Zex felt that the rumor felt ambiguous because it wasn't something easy to demonstrate the way to others, and that's why light attribute magic was often known as magic from the saints. But if that was the requirement to use light magic, then isn't Caroline now more than enough to use her light attribute magic? Not long after, Caroline called her brother and showed that she succeeded in making a fireball with her fire magic. Zex praised her and made Caroline happy and even excited until making 2 fireballs at the same time. Zex thought again if Caroline could use light magic. Then the royal family of this country, both the Holy Kingdom family and other families, would start targeting Caroline as their power. He didn't want to put his sister in a dangerous situation, but he doubted whether he could protect her alone in the future. The future might still be unimaginable for him, but both he and Caroline grew well. Little by little he got hope for the future. But then a familiar figure appeared in front of them. A female maid with her braided hair greeted Zex and Caroline in their room and explained that she was assigned to take care of them starting today, and introduced herself as Cheyenne. Zex smiled, and Caroline looked still doubtful with Cheyenne's arrival. Even though smiling, Zex knew who the real identity of Cheyenne was. The woman named Cheyenne Shahilachroma was a spy. In the noble residence, a man was seen sitting in his office chair and with a cold tone informed that this time his first task had come, and the task came from the Holy Royal Family. In front of him, Cheyenne was seen wearing her maid outfit, silent with a flat gaze, as if she no longer had light in her eyes. The man threw the paper in front of him, and with an annoyed and mocking tone called Cheyenne as a troublemaker and useless. He also ordered her to show that Cheyenne could be useful and could complete her task to them. Cheyenne also had to feel grateful for being able to serve the great Holy Royal Family. Cheyenne didn't talk much, and only bowed, accepting his order. Back to the present, Cheyenne introduced herself to the two of them and explained that she would serve as the maid who took care of them both starting now. Suddenly Cheyenne realized something and started walking, while saying that it seemed the room felt a bit warm, and asked permission to open the window. Yes, without permission from the two of them. When Cheyenne walked towards the window and stepped on the carpet, her foot suddenly slipped, and instantly Cheyenne fell with her face landing right on the floor. Even so, Cheyenne didn't show any expression and stood back up, then opened the window, with a flat face and her nose red from the fall earlier. Cheyenne said that she would be on standby in the hallway, and the two of them could call her if they needed anything. Cheyenne then left the room and was silent there for a while. Cheyenne knew that her target was the little girl who looked clinging tightly to her brother. According to the report, that Caroline had the potential to use light attribute magic, and her task this time was to monitor her and report the results as soon as possible after she saw a sign, even if it was a little. Not long after, Zex's room door opened and Zex and Caroline were seen coming out from there. Cheyenne asked what they needed. Zex answered that his sister just wanted to go to the bathroom. Cheyenne nodded, and the two of them walked away. But they thought Cheyenne would let it go, but Cheyenne instead followed them from behind. That made Zex, especially Caroline, feel uncomfortable. Zex told Cheyenne that she didn't need to come with them, but Cheyenne flatly answered that she had to because that was her task. Feeling annoyed with Cheyenne's stubborn nature, and also Zex, who always turned to her, made Caroline, with a slightly angry tone, ask her brother to look at her. Hearing Caroline, who still used her typical childish words, made Cheyenne comment, and she suggested Caroline to start calling Zex with the call Oni-sama, or brother, with more respect. Caroline didn't respond and turned to her brother. Zex smiled and agreed with Cheyenne, while explaining that according to him, they would be better to start education to Caroline as a girl, and asked his sister to call him with that call. Caroline looked doubtful and awkward. Even so, Caroline still obeyed her brother and called him with that call. Hearing it made Zex smile happily and praise her, which made Caroline also smile happily. Seeing the two of them made Cheyenne a bit surprised, because it was very rare to see a pair of noble siblings who could get along like them. She felt disturbed when seeing Zex, who looked like the only one taking care of his sister. But that made her job easy because she could approach Caroline when taking care of them both. When night came, Cheyenne was seen in the backyard of the mansion. She took out a letter and turned it into a bird using her magic and let it fly. Without her realizing, Zex watched all that from behind the window. The next day, in the afternoon, Cheyenne prepared snacks for them. When Caroline called her brother with her typical childish call, Cheyenne immediately scolded her, which made Caroline change her call and asked if the flour used for this food came from their garden. Before she could answer, Cheyenne scolded again and corrected the sentence used by Caroline that was not quite right. Hearing that, Caroline became pouty because she was always scolded. On the other hand, Cheyenne casually poured tea into her cup with a bartender-like style where her tea was pulled up. Yes, the water entered the glass, but in a spilling state. Cheyenne casually served the messy cup to them. Even Zex couldn't believe Cheyenne's beginner skills and let himself pour his own tea. Cheyenne refused and said that this was her task, and yes, again she poured her tea in the same way and the same result with her flat face. After all that, Cheyenne left carrying a trolley containing plates of leftover snacks to the kitchen. Cheyenne convinced in her heart that she had to make the people in this mansion accept her as Caroline's personal maid so that she could monitor her closely. Arriving at the kitchen, Cheyenne told the maids there that she brought her table trolley and asked permission to wash it herself. Hearing that, they became happy and asked her to do it. When preparing to wash, the maids asked if Cheyenne was the new maid. Then she didn't know what made Cheyenne have to come to this place to work. Hearing that made Cheyenne ask back the meaning of her words. The female maid explained that the heir of this next family was a colorless. Even so, Cheyenne still came here to work for this family that was destined to collapse. According to her, Cheyenne was weird, or at least had a weird reason and situation. Cheyenne flatly answered that she was employed through a broker and her identity was as a maid. Cheyenne also added that besides that the sister of the heir had golden hair that matched the light magic attribute, and wasn't that at least bringing hope for this family. The female maid answered that it was true that the sister of the heir had golden hair, and she also looked innocent and always clinging tightly to her brother, even though he was a colorless. Besides that, the sister was also very friendly to her maids. The male maid also commented that he was really looking forward to the sister growing up. After hearing all that, Cheyenne changed the topic by telling them that Caroline really wanted to know if the rose flower jam was really made from the rose flowers in their garden. Hearing that, the maids looked happy and enthusiastically would prepare various sweet snacks for Caroline. On the other hand, Cheyenne, who was washing, kept accidentally breaking every utensil she washed. When seeing Cheyenne, who was silent, the female maid approached her intending to store the utensils that Cheyenne had washed. She asked if Cheyenne had finished washing them. Cheyenne flatly answered that she had finished. When seeing the sink side, the female maid was silent, seeing the pile of broken plates and others there, and commented briefly that Cheyenne had finished. Night came, and Cheyenne informed them that dinner was ready. When they arrived at the table, Caroline called her brother while lifting the cloth often used for clothing protection when eating. Zex understood and approached her to attach the cloth to his sister's neck clothing. Cheyenne wanted to take over the task, but Zex didn't mind and asked to let him do it. Because she didn't have the opportunity to serve Caroline, Cheyenne planned to help feed Caroline. But Caroline refused firmly that she could eat herself. The words were immediately scolded by Cheyenne because the pronunciation was wrong. Caroline poutily changed her sentence as suggested by Cheyenne. Hearing that made Zex proud and praised her. Caroline agreed with her typical childish words, which again were immediately corrected by Cheyenne. That made the smile on Caroline's face immediately disappear and replaced with a pout. After dinner, Cheyenne prepared sleepwear for Caroline and intended to help her wear it. But Caroline instead hid behind her brother, showing a rejection reaction towards her. Seeing that, Zex told Cheyenne that he would change his sister's clothes. Cheyenne wanted to refuse because it was her task as a maid, but Zex explained that he liked taking care of his little sister and asked her to let him do it. In the end, Cheyenne accepted it and left the room to let the two of them sleep. Cheyenne then went to the roof area where the maids rested. Approaching her room, the sound of other maids' conversation was heard discussing how long the new maid aka Cheyenne would last this time. According to them, what happened to the first maid who took care of them ended horribly, where the maid who often considered colorless people as lowly humans, which made her unable to take care of Zex, and quit her job very quickly. Besides that, according to them, the family heir aka Zex was quite scary, where there was something that felt strange about him. Where the strange thing was like Zex, who suddenly spoke like an adult, even though he was only 1 year old, and started yelling or scolding the maids. That was also what made the next maid immediately resign. Another maid commented that according to her, Zex didn't look like a human, or a human turned into where she had seen Zex doing a scary dance. Hearing that, another maid was shocked and thought that Zex might be possessed or something, and according to her, it was better to separate Zex from his sister. Besides that, when the maids wanted to interact with Caroline, Zex always immediately stopped them, even though the maids worked to take care of them both. But their master aka Zex and Caroline's parents looked very indifferent to their children, which made the maids like not getting money from what they had done all this time. Not long after, Cheyenne entered the room, which made the two maids stop talking and greet her. They asked Cheyenne's agreement to their opinion, where according to her, becoming a maid or caretaker of Zex and Caroline was a light job, because Zex would take care of everything. But on the other hand, the mansion maids were very busy with their work, which made their jealousy between their maids and the mansion maids. Even they seemed to force Cheyenne to agree, and helped them the mansion maids to do their tasks, because the task to take care of Zex and Caroline would be taken care of by Zex himself. Worse, one of them even said that Zex was a colorless person, so his future depended on how good he was at licking his sister's feet as long as he could do it, and according to her, being born as a colorless in a noble family was something wasteful. Cheyenne had been silent, not saying a word, but only with one glance made the two maids silent and immediately chose to sleep. In the silence of the night, Cheyenne denied all the words from the two maids. If according to them Zex was licking his sister's feet, then they were very wrong. From her observation from Zex's gaze, he was holding himself to see her actions, whether she would harm them both or not. Even she also knew that the two of them looked very calm and also observed their surroundings. For a while Cheyenne felt there was a similarity between her and Zex, but she immediately convinced herself again not to mix her personal feelings into her work. She only needed to convince Zex so that she could let her be by Caroline's side as her personal maid. When asleep, Cheyenne dreamed of her past, where little Cheyenne was crying while running. The mocking voices came relentlessly like rain of arrows raining down on her. Her hopeful gaze tried to find someone she could still trust, but when approaching her father coldly said that their family had lost in political conflict and ended up being expelled from the country. The royal family of this country extended a hand to their family when they needed help, and thanks to them now they were prosperous again. Her father then held little Cheyenne's head and said with a tone full of ambition, emphasizing that all things about Cheyenne, both eyes, ears, body, hair, even soul, Cheyenne had to give all that to the royal family. Even if Cheyenne was useless, at least Cheyenne could be a sacrificed pawn. Her dream stopped with a question in her head. If she did that, if she died for their family, would her father accept her existence? The next morning, Cheyenne as usual intended to help Caroline change her clothes. That made Zex tell that Cheyenne didn't need to worry about them both. Cheyenne as usual explained that this was her task, and it was natural for her to work according to the paid hours. When Cheyenne invited Caroline to change clothes, Caroline refused firmly and immediately hugged her brother, while saying that she only wanted her brother to do it. Hearing that, Cheyenne gave a fact by asking if Caroline wanted to make her brother act like a maid. This was also part of the job as a girl, to behave politely to her brother. Hearing that, Caroline questioned her brother's opinion about Cheyenne's recent statement. Zex smiled and answered that he was waiting for that day when the day Caroline became an extraordinary girl. Caroline asked again if brother would be happy if she became a girl. Zex answered with a smile on his face that Caroline would become his little sister, who made his life full of fun and also authoritative. Hearing that, Caroline nodded with her serious face and said that she would try hard to become that figure. Just determined. Cheyenne again immediately corrected her words, which immediately made Caroline pout again. Since then, Caroline was taught manners by Cheyenne, starting from good walking position, etiquette when eating, etiquette when greeting and others. Apart from all that, Caroline was still a cheerful little girl and always close to her brother. Even like now, after all her training, Caroline enthusiastically invited her brother to race, running to the gazebo in their garden. On the other hand, Zex smiled seeing his sister, who was excited as usual. Zex thanked Cheyenne and said that Cheyenne came at the right time because previously the two of them had to keep distance from the maids, and they were also constrained in their gender. Zex told her that he would depend on Cheyenne from now on, especially. He also didn't really understand about girls. Cheyenne accepted the request with her usual flat expression. Zex then approached Caroline, who was in front of him, while Cheyenne was silent for a while seeing them from there, and asked herself. She was curious if she would succeed in gaining Zex's trust one day. For a moment, Cheyenne remembered her father's words, who only often called her useless and disturber. And when getting simple words from Zex a few moments ago, the feeling that had once disappeared came back, which made her feel a bit strange. The feeling of happiness when relied on by others. Cheyenne bowed and smiled for the first time. But on the other hand, even though Zex said like that, his gaze never said the truth and full of vigilance towards Cheyenne. Seasons passed, snow fell. In the garden with thick jackets, they as usual went there. Caroline enthusiastically saw the white, clean, and beautiful scenery. Even when seeing a wild horned rabbit, she enthusiastically told her brother. The rabbit was still a monster, even though its threat level was quite low. But for its size, it would be a serious threat to children. And sure enough, when seeing their presence, the horned rabbit growled angrily and immediately positioned ready to attack. Seeing that, Cheyenne immediately ran towards it, intending to protect them from the rabbit, but unlike Cheyenne, the two of them looked calm. Even Zex said a few words to Caroline before then Caroline squatted, and with a gentle tone invited the rabbit monster not to be afraid. Slowly but surely, Caroline approached it and gently succeeded in catching it. Caroline hugged the rabbit and stroked her cheek on the rabbit's fur. With a happy tone, Caroline commented that its fur was really soft, and also the color of her eyes and the rabbit had the same color. Zex was also happy and smiled while commenting that the two of them had beautiful red eye color. On the other hand, Cheyenne immediately rushed over and found that. Cheyenne was silent there as if nothing happened, but even though her face was flat, her face implied questions and also her shock. When night, Cheyenne made a report as usual, where in her report there was no development at all on her target, aka Caroline. Even Cheyenne included a story where Caroline succeeded in taming a wild monster, which made her confused whether it was a sign of light magic. After sending the letter using her magic, Cheyenne felt that she didn't hide any information, but she quite often speculated, and she shouldn't have included the incident this morning. Time passed and seasons changed. The morning light illuminated the two of them, who were doing body warm-up together in the garden. After training the body, they also practiced magic together as usual in the same location. Zex also as usual told the theories he knew in using magic. From afar, Cheyenne watched the two of them. From her point of view, Zex was a person who had noble status and also a colorless, who couldn't use magic, but Zex looked very enthusiastic and serious in teaching his sister about magic. Because of his actions, she guessed that Zex must love his sister very much, but she was also curious if Zex also felt jealous of his talented sister. Not long after, Cheyenne widened her eyes when seeing what she saw now. Caroline was seen trying to use magic as usual, and she tried hard to focus herself in magic. Then a small light appeared from her hand which slowly grew and sized like a ball in her hand. Yes, it was light attribute magic, and Caroline really could use it. Seeing that, Cheyenne, who was monitoring them from afar, was shocked and felt sure that it was light attribute magic named Light Ball. Cheyenne rushed away and felt she had to report the incident immediately, and when the report arrived, then Caroline would be called to the royal residence. On the other hand, Caroline looked happy because she succeeded in using the magic taught by her brother. Hearing that, Cheyenne's running steps stopped and turned back towards them, her feelings mixed after seeing them. Even so, Cheyenne emphasized to herself that this was her task. Night came, the two of them had dinner together as usual. When about to serve dinner, Zex spoke softly to Cheyenne and told her that he wanted to talk to her after Caroline fell asleep later. Cheyenne didn't suspect it at all and accepted it. After dinner and Caroline fell asleep in her room, Zex invited Cheyenne into the night forest. Cheyenne followed him without doubting at all and questioned what Zex would discuss with her. But a few moments Zex turned to her, Cheyenne felt an uncomfortable feeling. Zex turned to her, and with a calm tone he guessed clearly that Cheyenne was a spy from the royal family, right? The guess immediately made Cheyenne, who often put on a flat face, now looked shocked and started to panic. Her tone stuttered and her hands trembled as if feeling tremendous fear just from her true identity being known. Even Cheyenne herself didn't know why she could tremble like that. Zex commented again that he would consider Cheyenne's response as a yes answer. Zex asked if Cheyenne hadn't reported this, and he would remain silent and not tell anyone about her identity as a spy, so he also wanted Cheyenne to remain silent about the magic Caroline had. Hearing that, Cheyenne honestly said that she couldn't do that because she had sworn to be loyal to the royal family. With one snap, Cheyenne's camouflage magic immediately shattered and her ears turned long. Yes, Cheyenne was an elf. Using that, Zex threatened her and said with a grin if Cheyenne didn't listen to his request, then he would spread information about Cheyenne to the public. Everyone would know that the royal family had employed an elf who were one of the enemies of humans. People knew that they hated elves, and if this became public, he was curious how the citizens would act towards the royal family. Zex emphasized that Cheyenne would definitely make and change this country into chaos. Zex smiled and said that he didn't care about the country, and the important thing for him was only his sister's safety, and this chaos didn't come from him, but Cheyenne, who brought the chaos to the royal family. Someone who had promised loyalty to the royal family, namely Cheyenne. Zex then asked again if that was what Cheyenne wanted. Yes, this was no longer a mutual agreement, but a one-sided agreement dominated by Zex. Zex grinned and asked again if Cheyenne would accept his request. In the end, Cheyenne really surrendered and knelt before Zex and said that she accepted Zex's request if it was Zex's order. Zex then raised his hand and said that he ordered Cheyenne not to report anything about him and his sister, or known as the Foreignata siblings, without permission from him. After saying the order, a light surrounded Cheyenne's body, which looked like binding her. Zex felt there was something that just bound him. Cheyenne looked so shocked with what just happened. Zex then said that all this felt unfair if this agreement was only one-sided. Then Zex said his promise to himself that he would keep Cheyenne's secret as long as Cheyenne didn't violate their agreement. The same light surrounded Zex's body as their agreement was reached. After all that, Zex left while saying that he was looking forward to the cooperation between them for the future and said goodbye to Cheyenne. On the other hand, Cheyenne sat there with a face still shocked. She felt very strange with all the recent situations and questioned herself how all this could end up like this. Cheyenne immediately used her magic to hide her identity as an elf. She knew that she had been trained to be a spy, and she was very sure there was not one thing that could make her afraid. But all her training seemed to shatter and disappear just like that when facing Zex. Even she wondered why she could be afraid like that. Besides that, Cheyenne was also confused with the magic that Zex just used on her, a child who used magic that she had never seen before. That made her wonder who Zex really was.